Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa and today I am doing something a little bit different. I just got hit myself in the face. Okay, I just got this poetry collection yesterday and it is the next in a sort of series slash collection by Amanda Lovelace, who is the person who wrote The Witch Doesn't Burn in this one, which I have raved about multiple times on this channel. The Witch Doesn't Burn in this one is a collection of feminist poetry, particularly on the topic of female anger and working through issues with being hurt by men. This one is called The Mermaid's Voice Returns in this one. It's the third. The first collection was called The Princess Saves Herself in this one. I have not read that yet, but I just saw on Amazon that this book was out, so I decided to get both of those and I'll be reading the other one soon. But long story short, I'm going to be reading this and I'm going to react to it bit by bit and do a little reading vlog purely around this book because I think it's going to make me emotional and I think I'm going to have a full video's worth of things to say about it. So let's go. The series is called Women Are Some Kind of Magic. And the dedication is, for the little book mad girl, thank you for deciding to live long enough to see yourself write a book. Then another, then another, then another. Also, there's trigger warnings, so if you decide to read this book for yourself, be careful of the trigger warnings because there's a very long list right here. The foreword might be making me tear up a little. I need to calm down. So I've reached part 2. There were a few poems before part 1, which is called The Sky, actually started, and those hit me really hard. And then the beginning of part 1 continued along those lines, and then it kind of shifted focus in about the middle. So the first part of the first section, if you're not aware, this is going to be medium spoilery. Like, I don't know if you can spoil the poetry book, but this is a somewhat story-ish poetry book, and I'm going to talk about the sequence of topics that she goes over. So if you don't want to know that much detail before you read it for yourself, don't watch the rest of this video. The first theme that she looked at that hit me really hard was about girls escaping into fantasy, which I talked about a couple videos ago in my autism video about my childhood symptoms, and quite frankly most of my current ones. Escapism is super huge for me. It's huge for a lot of autistic people, and me particularly. I use fantasy quite heavily. I guess it's just something about the way Amanda Lovelace writes, but I just identify with some of the things she says really strongly. Like, I used to think I wasn't a poetry person and just didn't like poetry, but I think it was just because I've been exposed to the wrong kind. Much like school kind of ruined classics for me, it also kind of ruined poetry because they have you read the, you know, literary ones and the kind of snobby ones, and most of them are kind of abstract and not really about anything, or if they are about something, it's about something that I can't relate to at all, or even that doesn't make sense to me, or I don't think it's true. The one poem that I like from school is one that I found in a classics poetry collection I was assigned to read, and that was Two Roads Diverged in a Yellow Wood, or something like that. It's by Robert Frost, and that's because that one's about something and I can also identify with it a lot. But also I found that I enjoyed his other stuff. I guess just the way that he expresses things gets to me, and I think the way that Amanda Lovelace expresses things gets to me. So I want to read everything she's written poetry-wise. Poetry is something that is a bit different from books in that it's harder to define why you like it or why it makes sense to you. There are also themes right away of abuse and assault, so be aware of that. But then in the second part of the first section, when I was starting to get super emotional and crying, she actually switched tones and went into love poems, happy love poems, which was very different because when she was talking about the escapism and the fantasy and girls connecting to fantasy characters, it was in quite a melancholy way. And then there were a couple of bridging poems about finding someone to love you. And then there are quite a few poems about having found a love who cares about you and takes care of you, and were very sweet poems. But those really helped calm me down because one, I can't relate to them, so they're not going to hit me as hard, and two, they were not melancholy much at all. So that was really interesting how she organized that, and I'm interested to see where the rest of this collection goes. Oh, still keeping with the fantasy element, by the way, because she's talking about the romance in terms of princes and King Midas and various fantasy stories and how that relates to current day love. So I think, along with what's indicated by the title and the titles of the other two poetry books she's written for this collection, that the entire thing is going to be related to fantasy and using fantasy elements to make metaphors and such. So that's another reason that I really like her work. So I think it was good I read the next section on my stationary bike because I probably would have wanted to fidget during it. If we're following the poems along like a narrative, which is kind of how the last one was structured, and I think how this one's meant to be structured, we take that love story that I was talking about in the previous section, and pretty promptly in section 2 it turns into an abuse story, which is pretty graphic, which was upsetting in a very different way. It didn't make me emotional in the cry way, it made me emotional in the angry way, which is why I say it was good to be on my stationary bike, and just in the disturbed sort of way. And it explores themes of it being difficult to leave an abusive relationship and what it feels like when you finally do get out of that relationship. And from the last poem in this section, I'm getting the vibe that the next section is going to be about healing and recovery. There's also a reference to the play Othello by Shakespeare, which I am not familiar with the storyline of, and so I would like to read that soon so that I can better understand that poem. There's also a couple of other poems that reference other literary works, and so now I'm a lot more interested in trying to read those. So we're back to almost crying again. I'm on page 121, about 2/3 of the way through section 3. My mom, when I got this book, actually flipped this book open to a random page, and this is where she happened to land. And she read this poem, and she asked me if this was a book about asexuality. And I said, no, I don't know that it is. I thought it was just a feminist book. And this section has indeed been about recovery, and it's also about finding another love after you've been hurt and are scared to try that again with anyone else. But the title of this poem, which she puts at the bottom of her poem, so it's like the last word on the subject, is "He will stay by her side even if she never wants to sleep next to him." And it's just a very short little poem about Romeo and Juliet, a version in which they don't die at the end, and in which they get married, and Juliet doesn't want to have sex with him, and he's okay with that. And they're gonna stay together and be married even though they're not gonna do that bit of it. And that almost made me cry because it's just not something that I come across very often. and it means a lot to me when I find romance being decoupled from sex. It's not very common, and as a hetero-romantic asexual, it's pretty important to me. So I'll get on with reading the rest of the section. There are a couple of times in here when the font changes, and I didn't read well enough to figure out why that was. The different font is used for when other authors have contributed a poem. So this is one by Caitlin Seal. It's called Blade. And then there's one a couple pages later by Clementine von Radicus, and it's called Notes on the Term Survivor. Page 160's got a Medusa reference. Booyah. Well, I absolutely fell apart there at the end. Reading the acknowledgements tends to do that to me. I went and I read the acknowledgements, and then I read all the little post notes and everything. It just... So the last section, almost every other poem was contributed by another poet. And they're all listed at the back, as well as under each poem they contributed. And I think that for having so many people contribute, it was very cohesive. The last section was titled The Surviving, and it was pretty much about living day to day with a scarred past and mental health difficulties and just surviving. It's titled very well. And in the post note, the author's note at the end, Amanda Lovelace talks about how personal all three of the books in this series were to her, and particularly this last one. She feels like she worked through the first two to get to the place where she could express herself more freely in this last one. And she talks about how freeing writing is and how good for you it is to write, and then she encourages you to go out and write your own thing and express your own, sing your own song. It's about the mermaid's voice returns in this one, so speak your truth however is right for you. And of course that hit me particularly hard because I'm a writer, and it was just very special to me. Also, in this last section, 6 pages after the Medusa reference, there's a Chronicles of Narnia reference. And then, what was interesting after that? Oh, there's one about space mermaids, and this is one of the contributed ones. It's by Nikita Gill, and it's called Because I Am One of Them. And she, interestingly enough, used the same format that Amanda Lovelace tends to use, where the title at the bottom is a continuation of the poem. So that was really interesting and kind of made it blend in more with the rest of Amanda's work. And it's about how Nikita Gill thought of people who study the stars and astronauts and things as space mermaids. So that ties into the theme of the book. It just was special to me because I painted the space mermaid, and was inspired to do so by, I guess I'll put her name up because for some reason I can't think of it, but she's one of my favorite YouTube artists. This little book series is just very special to me, and I'm very excited to read the first one about the princess saves herself in this one. Also, I don't know if you can see it very well on camera, although it looks good in the viewfinder. This cover is vibrant purple, and I am thrilled with that. And there's also a continuation on the back of the title, kind of like she did the same with The Witch Doesn't Burn in this one, and probably with the princess one as well. So it starts, the mermaid's voice returns in this one, and on the back says, and she's tore the stars apart. And overall, I would say the whole thing is about finding your voice and expressing yourself. And then it goes into all those sub things that I've talked about. I would highly recommend getting this book. But as I said, be very careful with the trigger warnings. It lists them all right at the beginning. But I know I'm going to enjoy this collection for years to come. and I am sure I'll be able to read it a bajillion times and it will not stop making me cry. So I'll link below, and yeah, thanks for coming with me on this reading journey. It was really interesting to do this type of video. If you like it, let me know, and maybe I can do this with some other particularly interesting book in the future. I'll be seeing you in the next video. Bye!